A Mafia boss was taking his fiancée to dinner until he saw his ex pushing a stroller with twin boys on a Chicago sidewalk. Sterling Ashford adjusted his Patek Philippe watch as he guided his midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom through downtown Chicago. The late afternoon sun laid down golden streaks across the leather interior, lingering there, warming the seams and edges. And in that softened light, it revealed the woman beside him, Priscilla Whitmore, 29, with platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, designer sunglasses resting on her aristocratic nose. She was everything a man in his position should want: beautiful, connected, uncomplicated by emotions. Priscilla said that her father had invited 300 guests to the engagement party, and as she spoke, she checked her reflection, making sure nothing in the glass betrayed even a trace of strain. She added that all the important families would be there. Sterling's steel blue eyes stayed fixed on the road. At 37, he had learned that alliances were built on strategy, not sentiment, and the lesson had settled into him like a second spine. His relationship with Priscilla was 6 months old, not a romance, a merger, and he preferred it that way. After watching his own father die because he trusted the wrong person, Sterling had learned that feelings were liabilities. Love was a weakness. Family was a target. The traffic light turned red. Sterling stopped the car. "I appreciate how focused you are." Priscilla touched his hand. "No distractions. No complications." "In our world, distractions get people killed," he replied, the crosswalk filled with evening pedestrians. Sterling watched them absently, his mind already on the meeting after dinner. Then something made him focus. A woman pushing a double stroller through the crowd, dark brown hair in a practical ponytail. A simple coat, clearly not expensive. She moved with the careful precision of someone carrying precious cargo. Sterling's breath caught, even from a distance. Even with her head down, he knew that profile. The curve of her neck, the way she walked. Iris Brennan, the woman he had pushed away 24 months ago. Iris paused as one baby began to fuss. She leaned over the stroller, humming something soft. The baby quieted immediately. Then Sterling saw them clearly. 2 boys. Twin boys with dark hair. One looked up, and even from this distance, Sterling could see it. Steel blue eyes. His eyes. Sterling. Priscilla's voice came from far away. The lights green. Cars honked behind him. Iris disappeared around a corner with the stroller, but the image burned in his mind. Twin boys, about 1 year old. 24 months since he ended things with Iris. The timing was now tragically clear. Sterling's hands shook on the wheel, a sensation foreign to a man whose grip had never faltered. Not when he seized his father's empire at 25, nor when he eliminated those who stood in his way. But now, they were betraying his composure. "Do you know that woman?" Priscilla asked. Sterling didn't answer. His mind raced back to their last night together. Iris in his arms, whispering about wanting a real future, a home, children. He had been brutal. "Men like me don't get families. Families are targets. I can't give you that life." She had nodded quietly. The next morning, her resignation was on his desk. Her apartment empty. Her number disconnected. No tears. No accusations. Just dignity. But now Sterling realized something. Her quiet acceptance wasn't peace. It was protection. She had been hiding something. Hiding them. He pulled into the restaurant's valet parking, hands still unsteady. Priscilla checked her lipstick, oblivious. She represented everything he had chosen. Alliance without attachment. Power without vulnerability. So why did his chest feel hollow? Why did seeing Iris with those babies make his empire feel meaningless? One question echoed in his mind. What if those boys were his sons? What if the life he avoided was the only one worth living? What if the woman he pushed away had needed him more than he ever knew? What would you do in Sterling's position? Chase after her for the truth? Or forget what you saw and protect the alliance you've built? If this story moves you, hit like and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Subscribe to Secrets Narrated so you never miss another journey into the heart. The signature room sat on the topmost floor of the building, the kind of place where the most powerful people in Chicago came not only to eat, but to be seen. Sterling sat across from Priscilla at a VIP table by the window, with the whole city spread beneath them like a carpet of light. But he could not see any of it. Not the glittering towers. Not Lake Michigan, dark as ink in the night. Not even the woman seated in front of him. His mind was still standing at that crosswalk, where Iris had bent down to soothe a crying baby. Priscilla was talking about the guest list, about which families had to be invited to show respect, about how her father had reserved a special section for allies from the East Coast. Her voice came to him like a low buzzing from some other world. Sterling nodded at the right moments, offered sounds of agreement when they were expected, but his eyes were empty. The appetizer was served and then taken away, untouched. The main course arrived, and he picked up his knife and fork, only to set them down again without cutting a single bite. In his head, memories from 24 months ago surged in like a tide. Iris's small apartment in Pilsen, a place without expensive furnishings, yet always warm, always carrying the scent of fresh flowers. The last night they were together, candlelight trembling on the table, Iris curled in his arms, her fingers tracing invisible lines across his chest. She had whispered in a voice full of hope that she wanted a real future, that she wanted marriage, children, a small family they could call their own. Sterling had gone rigid. He remembered fear flooding through him when he heard those words. Not fear of Iris, but fear of himself. Fear that he would become weak, fear that he would place her in the sights of enemies who never stopped watching. He had told her, in a cold voice, that family was a weakness, that in his world people killed the ones he loved to bring him down, that he could not give her what she wanted, and never would. Iris did not cry. She did not beg. She did not scream or smash anything. She only nodded slowly, her amber eyes holding his as if she had known the answer all along, yet still needed to hear him speak it. The next morning, a white envelope sat on Sterling's desk, with her resignation inside. Her apartment had been cleared out as though no one had ever lived there. Her phone number no longer existed. She vanished from his life so cleanly it was frightening. And Sterling, instead of searching, had ordered Griffin to block every old number, to cut off every line of contact, to erase every trace of that relationship, as if it had never happened. Now, sitting in this lavish restaurant, Sterling recalculated the time. 2 long years. If Iris had been pregnant when they split, she would not have known right away. Maybe a few weeks later, when she noticed the change in her body, she tried to reach him, but his number had been blocked. Every path to him had been sealed shut. She had faced the pregnancy alone. She had given birth alone. She had raised 2 children alone for more than a year now. Priscilla's voice, sharp and cool, cut through his thoughts. She said his name. She said she had asked him 3 times, and did he even hear her? He blinked and looked at her as if only then realizing she was there. He said there was something urgent. He stood so abruptly that the chair scraped across the wood floor. He said he had to go. Priscilla stared at him. She protested that it was the middle of dinner, that they had not even ordered dessert, that she wanted to know what was going on. But Sterling was already walking out without looking back. His hand pulled out his phone even as his feet carried him quickly toward the elevator. He dialed Griffin, the man who was always ready, no matter the hour, no matter the day. He told him to find everything on Iris Brennan. He wanted her current address, her work, her finances, her medical records, everything. He wanted it before 6 in the morning. Griffin did not ask why. He never asked. He said he understood. Boss. Sterling drove through the Chicago night, streets he knew now looking like an unfamiliar maze. The image of Iris bent over the stroller, singing softly to a baby, played on repeat in his mind like a damaged film. The child's eyes looked up, eyes exactly like his. Had she tried to reach him, or had she chosen to hide him because she knew he would refuse? And if she had tried, how many of her calls had he blocked without ever knowing? Sterling did not sleep. All night he sat in the pitch-dark penthouse, no lights on, no whiskey poured, only sitting there and staring into nothing, waiting. The heavy gold timepiece on his wrist measured out each second with its steady tick, and every tick sounded like an accusation. When the Chicago sky began to shift from black to a pale, reluctant gray, a knock came at exactly 6 in the morning. Griffin stepped inside with a thick file in his hand, his face as expressionless as it always was. He said that this was everything he had found, boss. He set the file on the table, then retreated a single step and stood still, like a statue. Sterling reached out and switched on the desk lamp, and a thin wash of yellow light spilled into the room. He opened the file and began to read, page by page, line by line, detail by detail, detailing Iris Brennan's life since that fateful night, all laid out in ink. The first page recorded her work history. After she resigned from Sterling's company, Iris applied to a small accounting firm in the suburbs. 2 months after they broke up, she discovered she was pregnant. She kept working until the 6th month of the pregnancy, when the company abruptly terminated her contract, masking their discrimination behind vague performance reviews the moment her pregnancy became visible. There was no severance. There was no health insurance after she left. Sterling turned to the second page, and his heart felt as if a fist had closed around it. The call record showed that Iris had called his number 47 times in the 2 weeks after she found out she was pregnant. A barrage of desperate attempts, each one marked by a single word in the system: blocked. Griffin spoke, his voice flat and even. He reminded Sterling that he had ordered all old numbers blocked after she quit. Her number had been on that list. Sterling said nothing. He remembered giving that order while he was trying to convince himself that a clean break was best for them both. He had not imagined that the command would cut off nearly 50 pleas for help that went into a digital void by Iris to tell him she was carrying his children. The third page was medical, and what Sterling read made his hand shake. Iris had delivered twins at a public hospital, without good insurance, without anyone beside her. The birth had taken a dangerous turn because she suffered severe postpartum hemorrhaging and nearly died on the operating table. She stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks to recover, alone, with no family, no friends, no one coming to visit. Her newborns lay in incubators during the first days of their lives while their mother fought to keep her own life. The fourth page described her current life. Iris lived in a small apartment in Pilsen, a working-class part of Chicago, where the rent was cheap but the security was not. She worked part-time at a bakery called Sweet Haven, earning just enough to keep herself and her 2 children afloat. No savings, no support network, only her and 2 little children. Sterling turned to the last page, a copy of the 2 children's birth certificates, and something in him collapsed. First son, Noah Sterling Brennan. Second son, Miles Brennan. Noah Sterling. She had given his name to her firstborn son, the woman he abandoned, the woman whose calls he cut off. The woman who nearly died giving birth to his children alone in a public hospital had placed his name into the life of a child he did not even know existed. Sterling's hand stopped on that line. He read it again and again, as if his eyes could not be trusted. Noah Sterling Brennan. She had kept a piece of him close even after he had pushed her out of his life without mercy. Griffin stood in silence, watching, saying nothing. He had worked for Sterling long enough to know when silence was the only correct thing. Sterling rose and walked to the window, looking down at Chicago waking beneath him. The city he ruled, the empire he built, all of it suddenly felt meaningless beside that thin piece of paper. His voice went rough when he spoke. He said she had reached out to him desperately, dozens of times, only to be met with total silence. For the first time in many years, Sterling Ashford, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, felt himself guilty. Not guilty for crimes committed in business, not for the ruthless decisions he made to protect his empire, the ones he could accept and live with every day. Guilty toward the woman he once loved, and toward the 2 children he did not know existed. 2 children who had grown up without a father, while their father lived in silk and glass, only a few miles away. He turned back to Griffin, and in his eyes there was something the bodyguard had never seen before. Pain. He told Griffin to arrange for him to see her. Today. Griffin nodded. He said she was working the morning shift at the bakery, starting at 7. Sterling looked at the time. 6:15 in the morning. He reached for his coat. He said he was going now. Sweet Haven Bakery sat on a quiet corner in Pilsen, a small oasis tucked among aging brick buildings and modest grocery stores. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the early morning air, mingling with the rich aroma of just brewed coffee. Inside, small wooden tables were arranged neatly, pale cream curtains framed the windows, and the warm glow of hanging lamps wrapped the room in a kind of gentle embrace. Sterling parked a block away and watched through the windshield. He had brought no bodyguards. He wore no suit, only a simple jacket and jeans, as if he were an ordinary man stopping in for breakfast. Through the glass, he saw Iris wiping down a table, her dark brown hair tied back neatly, a white apron secured around her waist. She moved with quick, practiced ease, as though she had done this work hundreds of times. And perhaps she had. Through all the months, he had not even known where she was. He drew in a slow breath and stepped out of the car. The bell chimed as Sterling pushed the door open. Iris turned with the professional smile she reserved for customers, and that smile froze the instant she recognized the man standing in the doorway. 2 long years compressed into a single look. Her amber eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then steadied, becoming calm in a way that felt almost frightening. She inhaled, lifted her chin, and asked in a voice stripped of emotion what he would like to order. Sterling stepped closer, his heart pounding as if he were facing his most dangerous enemy, rather than the woman who had once slept in his arms. He said her name. She cut him off at once. She said she was working, and if he was not a customer, he should leave. He told her he needed to speak with her. She replied that they had nothing to discuss. Iris turned her back and continued wiping a table that was already spotless, as though he did not exist. Sterling did not move. He stood there, looking at her small but unyielding back, and said the one thing he knew would make her stop. He said he had seen her yesterday on Michigan Avenue with the children. Her hand stilled in mid-motion. She did not turn around, but her entire body went rigid. A heavy silence settled over the little bakery. Sterling swallowed and asked the question that had haunted him through the night. He asked if they were his sons. Iris turned then. Her eyes were cold as ice. None of the warmth left of the woman who had once whispered about family dreams in the dark. She said they were her children, and that he had given up the right to be their father 24 months ago. Sterling felt as though he had been struck, but he did not step back. He said she had not told him she was pregnant. Iris let out a short, humorless laugh, bitter and edged with scorn. She asked if he truly believed she had not tried. She said she had called him relentlessly, day and night. In those first 2 weeks, she asked if he knew what she heard each time. She stepped closer, her voice rising. She said the number you are trying to reach has been blocked, a cold, automated rejection that played on a loop while she stood there holding her pregnant belly, not knowing what she was supposed to do. Sterling stood motionless. There was nothing to defend. No words could erase the weight of every unanswered plea he had systematically silenced. Iris went on, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. She stepped closer, her eyes flashing with 2 years of buried pain. He wanted a clean break, Sterling, and he got one. She spat, the name feeling like a curse. He wanted me gone, and I disappeared. But you don't get to stand here now and demand a father's rights. Every single one of those unanswered cries for help was a plea you systematically silenced. You surrendered your place in their lives the moment you chose silence over us. The door at the back opened and an older woman stepped out. Jolene Murphy, the owner, 55 years old with silver hair pinned neatly and sharp, watchful eyes. She sensed the tension at once and moved to stand beside Iris in a protective posture. She asked if there was a problem. Jolene looked Sterling up and down with the wary gaze of a mother bear guarding her young. Iris drew a steadying breath and said there was no problem and that the customer was leaving. It was dismissal, clear and final. Sterling understood he could not force anything. Not here. Not now. He nodded slowly and walked toward the door, but before stepping outside, he paused and turned his head just enough for Iris to hear him. He said he knew he had no right. He knew he had been wrong. He had made the greatest mistake of his life when he let her walk away and blocked every path back to him. He looked directly into her eyes and said he would return, and this time he would not disappear. The bell rang again as he stepped out. Inside the bakery, Iris stood alone among the empty tables, her hand gripping the cleaning cloth so tightly her knuckles turned white. She did not cry. She had forgotten how to cry long ago, since that first night in the hospital when she woke after surgery and realized she was still alive. Alone, with 2 newborn sons who needed her. Jolene came to her side and placed a hand on her shoulder, asking if she was all right. Iris tried to smile, but it twisted and faltered. She said she was fine, yet her eyes were red and her voice unsteady. Outside, Sterling sat in his car without driving away. He looked through the glass at the small bakery, at Iris returning to her work as though the encounter had never happened. This was the place where she rebuilt her life from the wreckage he had left behind. Without his help, without his money, without his protection, she had done it all alone. And that filled Sterling with both admiration and pain. He had lost the right to stand beside her long ago, but he would not lose the chance to make things right, no matter how long it took, no matter how many times she turned him away. He would come back, just as he had promised. That evening, Sterling sat alone in the study of his penthouse, the desk lamp casting long shadows over the photographs spread across the oak surface. Griffin had provided more images of Iris and the twins, pictures taken from a distance, yet clear enough for Sterling to see every feature on the children's faces. He lifted one photograph and stared at Noah, the boy with blue eyes identical to his own, the straight nose, the strong square line of the jaw, already visible despite his small age, a miniature reflection of himself. Miles was different, his bright smile and the spark of mischief in his eyes belonging entirely to his mother. Sterling did not hear the door open until Priscilla's cool voice sounded behind him, asking who they were. He turned. Priscilla stood in the doorway, green eyes fixed on the photographs scattered across the desk. She entered without invitation, her heels striking the marble floor with a sharp rhythm, like the ticking of a countdown. Sterling did not attempt to hide anything. He set the photograph down and said evenly that she was his former lover. Priscilla picked up another photograph and studied the two children carefully. Her voice dropped several degrees as she asked about them. He answered that they were his sons. A heavy silence filled the room. Sterling watched Priscilla master her expression, surprise shifting into anger, and then smoothing back into the composed calm she wore so well. She placed the photograph down and asked what he intended to do, whether he planned to call off the engagement, reminding him that her father would not accept such a decision. Sterling replied that he had not decided anything, but he would not ignore his children. Priscilla fell silent for a long moment, and then something unexpected happened. She smiled, a sweetness so polished that Sterling narrowed his eyes in suspicion. She moved closer and sat gracefully in the chair opposite him, fluid as a cat. She said he was right. They were his children. She had no right to prevent him from acknowledging them. Sterling was taken aback by the sudden shift. Priscilla continued in an unusually gentle tone. She said she only needed to know her place in this matter. He could recognize the children and provide for them financially. They could still proceed with the wedding as planned. Many men in their world had children from previous relationships. It was hardly unusual. Sterling looked at her, unconvinced by such easy acceptance. As if reading his thoughts, Priscilla gave a soft laugh and said she was practical. This alliance mattered to both families. She would not allow something personal to disrupt something far greater. She rose and smoothed her dress. She said she was leaving and that he should think it over. They would speak again soon. Priscilla exited the penthouse with the same elegance with which she had entered. But the moment the elevator doors closed, and she stood alone in the cold metallic space, the smile vanished. Her face hardened to stone. Her green eyes flashed with calculation. She took out her phone and dialed a familiar number. She addressed Chester in a voice as cold as ice, and ordered him to find out everything about Iris Brennan. Weaknesses, work, relatives, everything. She wanted to know how to break her. Over the next 2 weeks, Iris had no idea that her life was being manipulated by an unseen hand. It began with a man in a gray suit appearing at Sweet Haven Bakery, introducing himself as a food safety inspector. He walked through the shop making notes with a displeased expression, and eventually produced a long list of violations that needed immediate correction if the bakery wished to avoid closure. Jolene's face drained of color as she read the list. Absurd requirements she knew her shop did not violate. Before she could protest, her phone rang. A low, unfamiliar voice spoke only one sentence, telling her to fire Iris Brennan or the bakery would face serious trouble. Then the call ended. Jolene did not tell Iris about it. She simply embraced the young woman and said everything would be all right. But Iris had troubles of her own. The first message arrived at midnight, while she had just settled Miles back to sleep after a nightmare. An unknown number. A brief and chilling message telling her to stay away from Sterling Ashford, or the children would be in danger. Iris stared at the screen with trembling hands. She deleted it, but she could not erase the fear lodged in her chest. That night she checked the locks 3 times before going to bed, and she barely slept. The second message arrived the next day, then the third, each one more explicit in its threat. Yet she told no one. She did not want to ask Sterling for help. She did not want to give him a reason to step into the life she had fought to rebuild on her own. And then Priscilla appeared. She happened to encounter Iris at the supermarket near her apartment, where Iris was buying formula for the boys. A beautiful woman with platinum blonde hair and sharp green eyes approached with a smile sweet as artificial sugar. She asked if Iris was indeed Iris, then introduced herself as Priscilla, Sterling's fiancée. Iris stood frozen, her fingers tightening around the box of formula. Priscilla continued in a tone of feigned friendliness. She said she knew about Iris and the children. She insisted she had no issue with them. Sterling could provide financial support for his sons. That was his responsibility. But Iris should not expect anything more. She tilted her head, the smile never wavering, and reminded her that Sterling would marry her in 3 months as planned. She asked if Iris understood. Iris said nothing. She simply stood there, watching Priscilla turn and walk away, the click of her heels against the supermarket floor echoing like a mocking laugh. That night, Iris returned to her small apartment, locked the door carefully, and gathered both Noah and Miles into her arms in the darkness. She sat on the bed holding her sons as though they were her only lifeline in a black sea, and for the first time since giving birth, she cried. Not for Sterling, not for the threatening messages, not for the hardships of her life, but because in a moment of weakness at the bakery that morning, when Sterling said he would come back, she had begun to believe him. She had begun to hope that perhaps things might be different. Now she understood. In their eyes, she was merely a problem to be handled, a small obstacle on the path to a powerful alliance among the wealthy. Tears fell into Noah's soft hair as she whispered that she was sorry for bringing her children into this. 3 days after the encounter with Priscilla at the supermarket, Sterling returned to Sweet Haven Bakery as he had promised. This time he carried a bouquet, bright yellow sunflowers that he remembered Iris once saying she loved, an awkward gesture that did not resemble the style of a Mafia boss at all. He pushed the door open, the bell chiming as before, and searched for her familiar figure among the wooden tables. Iris stood behind the counter, arranging pastries in the display case. She looked up at the sound of the bell, and Sterling saw immediately that something had changed. It was not anger like their last meeting, not the cold defiance in her eyes. This time it was distance, an invisible wall raised between them that he could feel even from several feet away. She looked at him for a second, then quickly looked away, as if unwilling to let their eyes meet for too long. He stepped toward the counter and placed the sunflowers down, telling her he had brought flowers and reminding her that she once said she liked sunflowers. Iris did not look at them. She continued arranging pastries, her hands trembling slightly, her voice steady and stripped of feeling as she said he should keep his distance. Sterling froze. This was not the reaction he expected. He could face anger, but this indifference unsettled him. He asked what had happened. He said he understood her anger before, that she had every right to it, but today she was different. She cut him off and said nothing had happened. She had simply reconsidered. He began to remind her that she had said he could come back. She interrupted again and said she was wrong. This time she lifted her gaze, and her amber eyes no longer held fire. There was only exhaustion, and something buried deep that looked like fear. She told him that financial support through lawyers would be enough, and that they did not need to see each other. Sterling stepped closer, trying to catch her eyes. He asked why, at least to give him a reason. He thought they had moved past this. Iris turned her face toward the window, avoiding him. Her voice trembled slightly, as she said she now understood her place. Her place. The phrase rang in Sterling's mind like an alarm. That was not Iris's language. That was not how she spoke. This was the woman who had bluntly told him he had no right to be a father, who had counted every blocked call and thrown the number in his face. She was not someone who spoke of her place with quiet resignation. He looked more closely and saw what he had missed. The dark circles beneath her eyes were deeper. Her shoulders were tight, as though bracing for a blow. She kept glancing toward the window as if expecting danger. She was not angry. She was afraid. Someone had made her afraid. Sterling said nothing more. He nodded slowly, picked up the bouquet, and walked out of the bakery. But instead of driving away, he sat in the Rolls-Royce parked a short distance off and pulled out his phone to call Griffin. His voice hardened as he told him he needed something checked. He wanted to know if anyone had approached Iris in the past week. Every meeting, every call, every unfamiliar face near her. Anything unusual. Griffin replied that he would need a few hours. Sterling gave him 3. 3 hours later, Griffin stood in the penthouse with a laptop and a grave expression. He opened files that Sterling did not want to hear but had to. Security footage from the supermarket near her apartment showed that 2 days earlier Priscilla Whitmore had approached Iris. They spoke for about 20 minutes. Griffin moved to the next image. Threatening messages had come from a disposable phone number traced back to a registration under Chester Vance. Sterling repeated the name in a low, dangerous tone. Chester Vance was one of Priscilla's men. Griffin confirmed it. There was more. The health inspector who visited the bakery the previous week did not exist in any city health department records. No inspector had been assigned to Sweet Haven in the past month. The man was an imposter. Sterling stood motionless, absorbing each piece. Priscilla met Iris. Chester sent threats. A fake inspector tried to intimidate the bakery. The pieces aligned into a picture so clear it was cruel. His fiancée was attempting to crush the woman raising his children. The silence that followed stretched long. There was no shouting, no explosion of rage, no shattered glass. Only a cold stillness that Griffin knew was far more frightening than fury. It was the silence before a storm, the silence of a kingpin planning his move. At last Sterling spoke, each word falling like a stone. He said Priscilla had threatened his family. Griffin waited, knowing the order was coming. Sterling told him to bring her to the penthouse immediately. He walked to the window and looked down at Chicago, sinking into dusk as evening settled over the city. Lights flickered on across the skyline like millions of watching eyes. His voice turned to ice as he added that she wanted to play this game. And that was fine. But she had forgotten who he was. The penthouse lay in darkness, lit only by the glow of Chicago spilling through the vast glass windows, pale streaks of light stretching across the marble floor like restless shadows. Sterling stood with his back to the door, looking out over the glittering skyline where millions of people lived their ordinary lives, unaware that above them, a war was about to begin. The sound of the elevator opening broke the stillness, followed by the measured strike of high heels against stone. Priscilla entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to being summoned at any hour. Her black cocktail dress fitted to perfection as though she had just stepped away from an elegant gathering. She remarked that he had called her in the middle of the night and asked what could possibly be so important. Sterling did not turn. His voice was even and cold as he asked what she had done to Iris Brennan. A brief silence passed before Priscilla answered in a tone sweet enough to taste artificial. She claimed she had merely spoken with Iris, woman to woman, to clarify matters, and asked what could possibly be wrong with that. Sterling finally faced her. He walked to the desk where Griffin's laptop still displayed the carefully arranged evidence. He lifted a stack of papers and dropped them onto the desk with a dry snap. He listed the threatening messages sent from a disposable phone registered under Chester Vance, her man. He mentioned the fake health inspector, who had no record with the city. He spoke of the call to the bakery owner demanding that Iris be fired. Then he looked directly into her eyes and asked if she wished to explain. Priscilla's face paled for a fraction of a second before she regained control. Her green eyes narrowed as she countered by asking if he was spying on her. Sterling answered without hesitation that he was protecting his family. Priscilla laughed, a sharp sound like shattering glass. She repeated the word family with open scorn and asked if he truly called a small-town accountant and 2 children from nowhere his family. She stepped closer, the sweet mask gone, revealing anger and contempt beneath. She demanded to know who he thought he was, whether he believed he could break the engagement without consequences. She reminded him that her father had planned this alliance for 5 years. 5 years she had waited. 5 years she had played the perfect fiancé, and now he would throw it all away for that woman. Sterling closed the distance between them, until only a few steps remained. His voice lowered, dangerous as the growl of a predator before it strikes. He told her to listen carefully. If she or anyone else touched Iris or his children, he would forget whose daughter she was. Any other woman might have trembled before that icy gaze, before the threat carried in the voice of the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago. But Priscilla was not just any woman. She had been raised in this world, born into its shadows and hardened by its schemes. She smiled faintly without fear and asked if he was threatening her, reminding him of who her father was. She tilted her head with open challenge and spoke of Reginald Whitmore, who controlled the entire East Coast and maintained alliances even Sterling treated with caution. If he wished to end the engagement, she said, so be it. But he should understand that he had just declared war on the Whitmore family. Sterling did not move at the threat. If that was necessary, he replied. Priscilla turned toward the elevator, but paused at the threshold. She glanced back, her smile cold enough to chill the air, and told him he would regret this. The girl and the 2 children would not be safe. She added that it was not a threat, only the truth. The elevator doors closed behind her. Inside the polished metal cabin, Priscilla took out her phone and dialed her father. Her voice was calm and businesslike as she informed him that Sterling Ashford had refused the engagement, choosing that woman and her 2 children over an alliance with them. She paused to listen to the anger on the other end, then continued. She had found his weakness, the 2 children and their mother. He would do anything to protect them. A cruel smile formed on her lips as she concluded that this was exactly what they could use. Back in the penthouse, Sterling stood alone in the dark, looking out over the city he had spent his life conquering. He knew the storm was coming. Reginald Whitmore was no easy enemy. He had money, power, and deep entanglements throughout the underworld. This war would not be simple. But this time it was different from every battle before. This time, he was not merely protecting an empire, not defending territory or influence. This time he was protecting his family, the ones he had not known he needed until he nearly lost them forever. Sterling took out his phone and called Griffin. He ordered increased security for Iris and the boys, around the clock. No one allowed near them without his permission. He paused, watching the Chicago lights flicker in the night, then told Griffin to prepare for war. The next morning, Sterling stood outside the door of Iris's small apartment in Pilsen. Alone, without bodyguards, without a luxury car. He had taken a taxi, trying to look as ordinary as possible, even though his heart pounded like a war drum inside his chest. He knocked and waited, unsure whether she would open the door after everything that had happened. Soft footsteps sounded within. Then the door opened a few inches. Iris stood there, surprise and caution in her eyes, her hair still slightly damp from a shower, wearing an old t-shirt and simple jeans. Behind her, in the small living room, Noah and Miles sat on a rug playing with brightly colored wooden blocks. "I need to talk to you," Sterling said before she could send him away. "The truth. All of it. No more hiding." Iris studied him for a long moment, weighing her choice. Then she sighed, stepped aside, and allowed him in. The apartment was smaller than Sterling had imagined, yet clean and warm, with simple framed pictures on the walls and pale yellow curtains softening the light. The furniture was worn but neatly arranged, and everywhere were signs of two small children, from a folded stroller in the corner to toys scattered across the floor. Sterling sat down on an old sofa across from Iris. He did not look at her at first, but stared at his own hands, hands that had done many things he was not proud of. "What you think you know about me," he began in a low voice. "Successful businessman, chief executive of an energy company, that is only the surface. The company is a front." Iris sat opposite him, silent, waiting, not interrupting. Sterling drew in a deep breath and continued. "I run the Chicago underworld. The men who call me boss are not corporate employees. They are," he paused, searching for a word that would not poison the air further. "You understand?" He finally lifted his gaze, prepared to see fear or disgust in her eyes. But Iris did not look shocked. She nodded slowly, her expression strangely calm. "I have suspected for a long time," she said evenly. "No one has that many bodyguards just for business. No one holds meetings at 2 a.m. No one has that look in his eyes when he talks about competitors." Sterling stared at her in surprise. She continued, "I am not foolish, Sterling. I chose not to ask. Because at the time," her voice softened, "I thought I loved you." The words struck him like a blade twisting in his chest. She had known, or at least suspected, and she stayed. She loved him knowing he was not a good man, and he had pushed her away. "Priscilla," Sterling went on, pulling himself from the ache rising inside. "My fiancée, she is the one who threatened you. The messages, the fake inspector, all of it was arranged by her." "I know," Iris replied without surprise. "She introduced herself to me at the supermarket." Sterling's jaw tightened. She will not stop. Her father, Reginald Whitmore, is far more dangerous. He controls the entire East Coast and has ties to the most powerful families in this world. "I ended the engagement last night." He held her gaze. "They consider it a declaration of war." Iris was quiet for a moment, then turned to look at Noah and Miles, playing on the rug, unaware of the adult conversation unfolding. Noah was trying to stack the blocks into a tower while Miles kept knocking them down, laughing with delight. "Are the boys in danger?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "I will not allow that to happen," Sterling answered firmly. "But you need to know the truth so you can decide." "Decide what?" "I want to protect you and the boys," he said, "but I will not force myself into your life. If you want me to disappear, to keep complete distance, I will respect that. Just allow me to arrange protection from afar. You will not see them, but they will be there to keep the children safe." Iris looked at him for a long time, her amber eyes searching his icy blue ones, as though looking for something real beneath them. Then she spoke slowly and clearly. "You said you would come back. You said you would prove it, with actions, not words." Sterling nodded. "I will. Then prove it," she said with quiet resolve. "Not with money, not with bodyguards, not with power or things you can buy. Prove it by being present. Every day, like an ordinary father. She glanced toward the boys. Noah does not know what a father is. Miles does not know what it feels like to be held by his father. If you want to be their father, start with the smallest things, not grand promises. Sterling turned his eyes toward his sons, truly seeing them from close for the first time. Noah looked up, perhaps sensing the weight of that gaze. The child's blue eyes met the blue eyes of the unfamiliar man, and in that brief moment, something shifted deep within Sterling's chest. This was his son, his blood, and he had missed the first 13 months of their lives. "I will not disappoint you," he whispered, unsure whether he was speaking to Iris or to himself. "Not you. Not them." That weekend, Sterling sat on a weathered park bench in a small park in Pilsen, arriving 30 minutes before the agreed time. He did not drive the Rolls-Royce Phantom. He took a taxi. He did not wear a tailored suit or an expensive shirt. Only a simple button-down and jeans, like any other father bringing his children to the park on a day off. He wanted to look ordinary. He wanted, for a few hours at least, to belong to this quiet, unremarkable world. Griffin stood at a distance near the park entrance, close enough to intervene if necessary, far enough not to draw attention. It was a compromise between the protective instinct of a crime boss and the fragile hope of a man meeting his children for the first time. He sent his security detail to circle the block, needing to prove to Iris he could be just a man, even while his world watched from the shadows. Sterling checked his watch for the 10th time, his foot tapping restlessly against the dirt. He had faced the most notorious mobsters without a tremor. He had made life-and-death decisions with steady hands. Yet now he felt like a nervous teenager waiting for a first date. Then he saw them. Iris pushed the double stroller into the park, her brown hair lifting gently in the breeze, caution still written across her face. Inside, Noah and Miles sat side by side, round eyes wide with curiosity as they took in the world. Sterling rose to his feet, his heart quickening. Iris stopped a few steps away, as though marking an invisible boundary. She looked down at the boys and spoke softly, telling them that this was Sterling and that he was a friend of their mother. A friend of their mother. Sterling understood she was not ready to call him father in front of them, and he accepted it. He had to accept whatever she allowed. He knelt slowly, lowering himself to the level of the stroller to truly see his sons up close for the first time. Miles, the more outgoing one, immediately broke into a wide grin at the sight of a new face, reaching toward him as though eager to touch this stranger. Noah was different. The boy studied Sterling with blue eyes identical to his own. No smile, no fear, only a seriousness that seemed almost too deliberate for a 13-month-old child. Sterling had never felt so carefully assessed, not by rivals across a boardroom table, not by enemies in dark alleys, but by a child who could not yet speak, trying to decide who this man was. Iris explained quietly that Noah was cautious with strangers and asked him not to force it. Sterling nodded and extended his hand slowly, not toward Noah, but toward Miles. The little boy immediately grabbed his finger and laughed, as though he had discovered a new toy. The afternoon moved slowly and awkwardly. Sterling pushed the stroller along the path while Iris walked beside him at a measured distance. Miles babbled endlessly, pointing at everything from birds in the trees to another child's bright balloon, as though introducing the entire world to this newly arrived man. Noah remained silent, his eyes tracking Sterling's every movement. Sterling tried his best. He fed them snacks and spilled crumbs everywhere because he did not know how to tilt the container properly. He played peekaboo, and Miles erupted in delighted laughter while Noah continued to watch him with mild skepticism. He attempted to read them a small book about animals, but his voice sounded stiff, more suited to a financial report than to the roar of a lion or the trumpet of an elephant. Iris observed quietly, and Sterling noticed the faint curve at the corner of her mouth. Perhaps she found it almost amusing to see a powerful Mafia boss struggle with a box of crackers and a picture book. Late in the afternoon, when the sun tilted west and the air grew cooler, they settled onto a bench before leaving. Sterling felt more exhausted than after any tense meeting, yet he did not want the time to end. He did not want to walk away from them. Then it happened. Somehow, Noah climbed out of the stroller and slowly made his way toward Sterling on small hands and knees. Iris instinctively moved to intervene but stopped, watching with curiosity. Noah halted directly in front of Sterling and looked up at the man seated on the bench. Blue eyes met blue eyes, serious and searching. Then the child reached up, tiny fingers brushing Sterling's cheek, as if confirming he was real. Da, Noah said in a clear, bright voice. Sterling froze. Iris gasped softly, explaining that Noah had never said that to a stranger, that he had not even said it to Jolene, that it was the first word he had spoken to anyone besides her. Something tightened painfully in Sterling's chest. Heat burned behind his eyes, a sensation he had not felt in decades. The son he had not known existed, the son who had lived 13 months without a father, had just given him the most sacred name. Instinctively, Sterling bent down and lifted Noah into his arms, awkward and uncertain because he had never held a child before. He feared holding too tightly and hurting him, feared holding too loosely and letting him fall. Noah did not resist. The boy rested his head against Sterling's shoulder as though that place had always belonged to him. Miles, not to be outdone, raised his arms and made impatient sounds demanding the same. Sterling looked at Iris for guidance, and she nodded. He gathered Miles into his other arm and sat there on the park bench with one child on each side, completely unsure of what to do next. Iris watched them, and for the first time since seeing Sterling again, she noticed something different in his eyes. Not the cold calculation of a crime boss, not the composure of a powerful man, but fear. Fear of doing it wrong. Fear of losing them. Fear of not being enough for the two small lives resting in his arms. It was something she had never seen in Sterling Ashford. And it was that very thing that made her begin to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he truly wanted to change. The next 3 weeks changed everything. Sterling Ashford, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, the man who commanded respect across the entire underworld, began learning how to be a father from nothing. In the first week, he arrived at Iris's apartment every morning before she left for work, wearing a simple shirt and jeans instead of a 3-piece suit, ready for whatever task he was given. Sterling's first attempts at fatherhood were a disaster. Diapers ended up lopsided, adhesive tabs refused to stick, and he constantly forgot the basics. It took a full week of patient endurance and a lot of mockery from Miles before he finally secured a diaper correctly. He called Griffin immediately, his voice carrying the pride of a man who had just completed a major operation. Griffin paused before responding in his usual even tone, offering congratulations, boss, though Sterling could hear the restrained amusement beneath it. In the second week, he learned how to prepare formula. He misjudged the proportions 3 times in succession, once too diluted, once too thick, once with water too hot. Noah rejected the bottle and cried as though under torture, leaving Sterling momentarily helpless. But he did not quit. He tried again, and again, and again. On the 5th night, when Noah finally finished a bottle prepared by his hands and fell asleep in his arms, Sterling looked down at his son as if he had conquered the world. The 3rd week brought the harshest test. At 3 in the morning, Iris's phone rang. Sterling's voice came through, telling her that Miles had a fever and that she should keep sleeping because he had it handled. She did not return to sleep. She lay in bed listening to his footsteps moving back and forth through the apartment, the sound of running water, the low murmur of his awkward reassurances to a restless child. She slipped quietly into the living room and saw him seated on the sofa with Miles in his arms, a damp cloth resting on the boy's forehead. Sterling wiped him down whenever the temperature rose, checked it every hour, and did not close his eyes once. By morning, the fever broke. Iris found Sterling asleep in the chair, Miles resting peacefully against his chest, one small hand wrapped firmly around his father's finger. She stood there for a long time watching them, and something within her began to soften. In those weeks, Iris discovered many things about Sterling she had never expected. He declined an important meeting with business partners because he had promised to take the boys to the park. He memorized the lullaby she used to sing, off-key and uncertain, yet Noah and Miles loved it anyway. He remembered that Miles favored the blue teddy bear, and that Noah preferred books with pictures of cars. He stopped wearing expensive suits when he visited, choosing clothes that could easily be washed because he knew they would be covered in milk, drool, and crumbs. One night after the boys were asleep, Iris and Sterling sat together in the small living room. The light was dim, the apartment quiet except for the steady breathing of Noah and Miles drifting from the bedroom. Iris looked at him and said he was different from the man she once believed him to be. Sterling did not meet her gaze but studied his hands, hands that had recently learned to hold a child, to change a diaper, to mix formula. He said he was still the same man, only now there was an added part. She asked what part. He was silent for a moment, before answering that it was the part that wanted to be worthy of them, worthy of her. The silence that followed was not heavy but understanding. Iris said softly that she was beginning to believe he had changed. Sterling shook his head slowly. He said he had not changed. He had finally become the man he should have been from the beginning, if he had not been so afraid 24 months earlier, if he had not pushed her away. Iris watched him for a long time, her amber eyes reflecting the dim light. Then she did something that stole his breath. She reached out first and placed her small hand over his. She did not speak. She simply touched him. It was the first time she had touched him since they reunited. Sterling did not move, scarcely dared to breathe, afraid any motion would break the fragile moment. Outside the window, Chicago remained lit and restless as always, but inside the small apartment in Pilsen, amid the scent of formula and the soft breathing of 2 sleeping children, something had begun to mend. The old wounds were not fully healed, yet at least they had stopped bleeding. 2 weeks after the night Iris reached for Sterling's hand, the darkness they had tried to outrun finally arrived. Sterling was seated in the conference room of his penthouse across from Pierce and several trusted associates. The news was not good. Reginald Whitmore had begun to move. A warehouse at the port had been set on fire. 2 longtime partners had abruptly severed ties. Rumors spread that Whitmore was reaching out to other families in an effort to isolate Sterling completely. The war had begun before Sterling had finished preparing for it. Meanwhile, in the small apartment in Pilsen, Iris had just laid Noah and Miles into their cribs after singing them to sleep. The clock read 9 in the evening. The night felt quiet, ordinary. Griffin stood watch outside the building as usual, his car parked at the corner with a clear view of both the main entrance and the back door. He noticed the unfamiliar vehicle the moment it pulled into the alley. A black SUV without license plates, idling too long, no one getting out. He lifted his phone, ready to call Sterling, when 3 men stepped from the vehicle and moved directly toward Iris's building. He pressed call while already running from his car toward the entrance, telling his boss that 3 men were approaching the apartment and that he was going in. Inside, Iris was picking up toys when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the casual shuffle of neighbors returning late. Several sets of steps. Quick, intentional. The instinct of a single mother living in an unsafe neighborhood told her something was terribly wrong. She did not think. She acted. She ran to the bedroom, lifted both Noah and Miles, even though they were fast asleep, hurried into the bathroom, locked the door, and slid down against the far wall with both children pressed tightly against her chest. The front door burst open with a crack like thunder splitting the night. Wood splintered, hinges tore free. Heavy footsteps searched the apartment. Objects were knocked over, cabinet doors thrown open. Low male voices issued commands to one another. Noah woke, eyes wide in the darkness, his mouth opening to cry. Iris placed her hand gently over his lips and whispered as steadily as she could for him to be quiet for her. Noah stared at her as though he understood the seriousness in her eyes and fell silent. Miles continued sleeping, unaware of the chaos beyond his blanket. The footsteps drew closer to the bathroom. Iris held her sons tighter, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might break free from her chest. She prayed for anything, anyone, as long as her children would be safe. Then the sounds outside the bathroom erupted, fists striking, bodies slamming into walls. A muffled groan, swift, efficient, not prolonged. Then silence, a silence more terrifying than the noise before it. A knock sounded on the bathroom door. Griffin's voice came through, telling her it was safe and asking her to open the door. She did not unlock it immediately. She had learned not to trust easily. She waited. Griffin understood. He spoke the password Sterling had given her earlier, a meaningless phrase known only to 3 people. He had insisted she memorize a safety password, just in case, even as she tried to push him away. Only then did she stand on shaking legs and unlock the door. 15 minutes later, Sterling stormed into the apartment like a hurricane. He saw the shattered front door, the overturned furniture, and his heart seemed to stop for a single breath before his legs carried him to the bathroom. Iris sat in the corner, still holding both children, trembling uncontrollably. When she looked up and saw him, every wall she had built collapsed at once. Sterling dropped to his knees and gathered all 3 into his arms. He said nothing. He simply held them as though they might disappear if he let go. Iris felt him trembling, not from cold but from fear. The hands that had never shaken while making ruthless decisions now shook as they wrapped around her and the boys. She lifted her eyes and saw his were wet, the icy blue no longer cold, but red and shining with tears. For the first time in her life, she saw Sterling Ashford truly afraid. He apologized in a voice rough with strain, saying it was his fault, that his world had touched her and the children, that he was sorry. Iris did not accuse him. She did not scream or push him away. She only asked if the boys were all right. Sterling checked Noah and Miles carefully and gently, then asked if she was hurt. She nodded that she was fine, and then she began to cry. It was the first time she had cried in front of him, the tears she had held back for so long finally breaking free. Sterling held her tighter and let her weep into his shoulder, knowing no words would ever be enough. When she calmed, he told her she needed to leave this place and come live with him. The mansion had stronger security and guards around the clock. It was no longer safe here. Normally, Iris would have refused. She would have insisted she did not need his protection, that she could manage on her own. But tonight, after sitting in a bathroom clutching her children while strangers tore through her home, she understood that pride would not shield Noah and Miles. She agreed. Sterling looked at her in surprise at how quickly she answered. She told him she was not agreeing for him but for the boys. If being with him meant greater safety for Noah and Miles, she would go. That night, Griffin and the security team escorted Iris and the children to the mansion in the Gold Coast. In the car, Miles slept in Iris's arms, while Noah rested against Sterling. Midway through the ride, Noah opened his eyes, looked up at his father with clear blue trust, then closed them again as if completely at peace, as if the child were saying he believed in him. Sterling looked down at his son and whispered too softly for anyone to hear that he would protect them at any cost. Sterling's mansion in the Gold Coast overwhelmed Iris from the moment she stepped through the towering iron gates. A marble staircase curved upward to the second floor. Ceilings soared high above with crystal chandeliers scattering light like fragments of stars, and every room was larger than the small apartment where she had lived for more than a year. Sterling led her to a bedroom on the second floor, near his own yet set at a respectful distance. The room held wide windows overlooking the garden, a king-size bed dressed in white linen, and a double crib already placed in the corner for Noah and Miles. He told her gently that this was her home now, and that she could change anything she wished. Iris looked around and realized the room had been prepared with care. From the framed artwork to the rocking chair by the window meant for late-night lullabies. This was not something arranged in a few frantic hours after an attack. Sterling had done this earlier, perhaps from the moment he learned his sons existed. The boys adapted to the new house faster than their mother did. Miles toddled through the halls on unsteady legs, exploring every cabinet, every drawer, every door. He discovered the playroom Sterling had arranged in advance, and shouted with delight at the sight of new toys, bright picture books, and a soft rug covering the floor. Noah was different. The quieter child seemed drawn to the garden behind the mansion, where tall old trees stood watch, and rose bushes lined the path. He could stand for long stretches, simply observing the leaves shifting in the wind, his eyes serious as if contemplating something far beyond his years. The day after they moved in, Pierce came to visit. Sterling's 62-year-old uncle and most trusted advisor stepped into the living room with undisguised curiosity. When he saw Noah and Miles, he stopped, his eyes growing moist. He murmured in wonder that they looked so much like Sterling as a boy, especially the quieter one. He pointed toward Noah, who regarded him with that familiar caution. Pierce then turned to Iris, who stood nearby, still unsure of her place in this grand house. He offered her a warm smile and told her she was the first person who had ever made Sterling afraid in a good way, and that his nephew needed someone like her. The most surprising transformation came from Griffin. The cold and reserved bodyguard somehow became Uncle Griffin in the boys' world. Miles adored climbing onto him, tugging at his ear, and laughing while Griffin stood as still as a statue, expression unchanged yet never pushing the child away. Noah preferred sitting on Griffin's lap while he read aloud, even though Griffin's voice carried the same tone he might use for a financial briefing. Once, Iris paused in the kitchen doorway and found Griffin feeding the boys. His face remained stern, but his hands moved with unexpected gentleness as he lifted a spoon toward Miles and wiped porridge from Noah's cheek. She watched for a long time and understood for the first time why Sterling trusted this man with his life. About 2 weeks after moving in, Miles developed another fever. It seemed to happen often with the lively child whose small body was still building strength. Sterling and Iris took turns through the night, one watching while the other slept briefly. They moved together with a quiet rhythm, no need for many words, only a glance or a nod. At 4 a.m, the fever finally broke, and Miles drifted into peaceful sleep. Iris sat beside the crib, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Sterling remained next to her, just as weary but unwilling to leave. At some point, Iris leaned unconsciously toward him, her head resting against his shoulder. She did not realize what she was doing. Her body simply sought the nearest comfort. Sterling froze, afraid that any movement might wake her and break the moment. She fell asleep against him, her breathing soft and even. He stayed there until dawn, unmoving despite the numbness in his shoulder and the ache in his back. He listened to her steady breaths and the faint sounds of the boys sleeping. For the first time in his life, he understood what simple happiness meant. When the first light filtered through the curtains, Iris stirred. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was, and when she realized she had slept on his shoulder through the night, color rushed to her face and she straightened quickly, apologizing. Sterling interrupted gently and told her she needed rest and that she should not apologize for that. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. No longer victim and protector, no longer single mother and absent father, no longer former lovers divided by fear and pride. They were beginning to become a family. While family life inside the mansion gradually settled into a fragile rhythm, beyond the tall walls, the storm continued to gather strength. Reginald Whitmore was not a man who accepted humiliation, and Sterling's decision to break the engagement with Priscilla was the greatest insult he had ever endured. In their world, that meant only one thing: war. The bad news arrived in waves. First, a warehouse at the port, one of Sterling's most important facilities, went up in flames during the night. The estimated damage reached $2 million, yet the greater concern lay in the message behind the fire. Whitmore could reach anything that belonged to Sterling if he chose to. Next came the casino downtown, the most stable source of income, suddenly subjected to relentless inspections from police and regulatory agencies. Whitmore had people within law enforcement, something Sterling had always known, yet he had not expected such open use of that influence. Finally, longtime business partners began withdrawing. Some politely declined future cooperation. Others disappeared without explanation. Griffin investigated and discovered that Whitmore had contacted each of them personally, offering threats too persuasive to ignore. Sterling called an emergency meeting in the study of the mansion. Pierce, Griffin, and Monty, his personal attorney, gathered around the table with grave expressions. No one spoke for the first few minutes. The air felt heavy, charged like the sky before a violent storm. Monty broke the silence. Whitmore was forming alliances with smaller families, promising to divide Sterling's territory among them if they stood with him. The objective was clear: total isolation. Pierce, ever calm and perceptive, exhaled slowly and said that if a full-scale war erupted, both sides would suffer deeply. And then his eyes drifted toward the hallway that led to Iris's room and the nursery at the far end. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Sterling nodded slowly. There would be no full-scale war. Not now. Griffin looked at him, waiting. Then what is your move? Find a way to end this without bloodshed, Sterling replied, his tone steady but firm. Whitmore has secrets. Everyone does. We find his. The meeting ended, yet Sterling remained in the study alone. He sat in the dark, staring at the city lights beyond the window, weighing the choices before him. That was when Iris entered without knocking, a privilege she had gained without either of them noticing. She asked quietly if he was all right, and took the chair opposite his desk. He answered that he was fine, and they both knew it was not true. She told him gently that he was not fine. She had seen his face during the meeting. She had seen the way his eyes drifted toward the children's room whenever danger was mentioned. Sterling sighed and let the mask slip, the one he wore for everyone else. Whitmore is forcing a choice, he admitted. Attack or be attacked. That is how this world works. Iris sat in silence for a moment before asking what he intended to do. He confessed that he did not know. In the past, he would have struck first without hesitation. That was how he built everything he owned. And now, he looked toward the door behind which Noah and Miles slept. Now I have something to lose, something worth more than any empire. Iris rose and stepped closer to him. Her voice was gentle but unwavering. You do not need to prove anything to me through violence. I have seen who you are when you stay awake all night because Miles has a fever. I have seen who you are when you fail 5 times at changing a diaper and do not give up. That is real strength. Sterling watched her without interrupting. She continued that a strong man is not the one who defeats the most enemies, but the one who protects what matters most. Noah and Miles need a living father, not a fallen legend. Her words pierced the darkness that had clouded his thoughts. He called Griffin back into the room and issued a new order. Find every secret Reginald Whitmore has, past and present, every questionable transaction, every enemy he has betrayed. I want to know who seeks revenge against him and who holds leverage over him. Griffin nodded that he knew where to begin. Information is a better weapon than a gun, Sterling said quietly, and it spills less blood. Griffin left with his assignment. Sterling stood at the window again, looking over Chicago stretched beneath him in glittering lights. Iris joined him without speaking. She did not need to speak. Her presence was enough. They stood together, gazing at a city of brilliance and shadow, aware that the battle ahead had not yet ended, but this time Sterling would not face it alone. One way or another, the war was moving toward its conclusion. 3 days after his conversation with Iris, Griffin returned to the mansion, carrying a thick file in his hands. He entered Sterling's study and placed the stack of papers on the desk with an expression Sterling had never seen on his loyal guard, something caught between tension and hesitation. Griffin said he had found what Sterling needed, and something he had not expected. Griffin had been quietly digging into Whitmore's past for years, but only now did the final piece of the puzzle fall into place. Sterling opened the file and began to read. The first pages contained what he had anticipated: a list of Whitmore's former enemies, men he had deceived and betrayed over 40 years in the underworld. There was evidence of illegal transactions, records that could send Whitmore to prison if delivered into the right hands. There was even a list of witnesses willing to testify against him under proper protection. All of it was useful, yet none of it felt decisive enough to end this war once and for all. Griffin continued as Sterling turned to the final pages and said there was more. Something connected to his father. Sterling froze, his hand suspended over the paper. Griffin drew a steady breath before speaking again. 12 years ago, your father was betrayed and killed. You always believed it was a minor rival seeking territory. But I found a witness who was there that night and is still alive. Griffin paused as though weighing the burden of the next words. The man behind it was Reginald Whitmore. The room seemed to congeal around them. Sterling read the final pages, the detailed testimony, the evidence linking Whitmore to the assassination of his father a lifetime ago, a ghost that never truly stopped haunting him. His hand trembled as he turned each page, eyes tracing the lines again and again as if refusing to accept what they revealed. His father had not died because of misplaced trust as he had believed. His father died because of Whitmore, the same man who later sought to marry his daughter into Sterling's family. It was a cruel circle. Whitmore eliminated his father to clear the path for his own empire, and 12 years later intended to control the empire Sterling built through marriage to Priscilla. Had the engagement proceeded, Whitmore would have held influence over both families, and the son of the murdered man would never have known the truth. Sterling asked why he had never known this, his voice rough with restrained fury. Griffin replied that Whitmore was skilled at concealment. The witness had been afraid and silent for 12 years, but persuasion had its methods. Sterling did not ask what those methods were. He did not need to. He rose and walked to the window overlooking the garden where Noah and Miles played under a guard's watchful eye. Rage surged through him like a tidal wave. Whitmore deserved death, deserved loss, deserved to feel the emptiness Sterling had carried since he was 25. For half his life, Sterling had carried that festering ache in his soul. For 12 years he built an empire to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy, all while the man responsible thrived and plotted further control. Then Noah's laughter drifted up from the garden, bright and unburdened. A moment later he heard Iris's gentle voice reading to Miles from the next room, warm and steady. Sterling closed his eyes. If he chose revenge, the war would deepen. Whitmore had children and grandchildren and an empire prepared to fight. Blood would spill, and not only the blood of enemies. Iris would suffer. Noah and Miles would suffer. His father died because of this world. Did he want his sons to grow up beneath the same shadow of hatred and violence? A quiet knock sounded, and Pierce entered, already aware of the revelation from Griffin. He asked what Sterling intended to do with this information. Sterling turned from the window. His eyes were still cold, but the wild fury had receded. He answered with unexpected calm that he wanted a meeting arranged with Whitmore, just the two of them, on neutral ground. Pierce asked cautiously if he meant to kill him. Sterling shook his head. He said he intended to give Whitmore a choice, something his own father had never been granted. Pierce studied him for a long moment, then nodded and left to arrange the meeting. Alone again, Sterling approached his desk and picked up a framed photograph resting in the corner. His father stared back at him. The man who had taught him everything about this world, who died when Sterling was 25, leaving behind an empire and a wound no one could soothe. Sterling spoke softly to the photograph, recalling that his father once said revenge was best served cold. He whispered that he would not consume that meal. He would choose family. He would choose the future instead of the past. Noah's laughter rose from the garden once more, and this time Sterling allowed himself a small, weary, but genuine smile. The abandoned restaurant stood on the outskirts of Chicago, neutral ground claimed by no family. It had once been an elegant Italian establishment before closing several years earlier, and now only dust covered the tables. Chairs were stacked in corners, and shadows filled every hollow space. Sterling arrived 15 minutes early, alone, carrying no visible weapon. Griffin parked several blocks away, prepared to intervene if necessary. But this was a meeting between two men, and Sterling intended to honor the unspoken code of their world. He sat at a table in the center of the room where moonlight slipped through dirty windows just enough for them to see each other, and waited. Footsteps echoed from the back entrance at the exact agreed time. Reginald Whitmore entered, 60 years old, silver hair combed neatly back, hawk-like eyes sweeping the room before settling on Sterling. He had come alone as well, observing the same silent rule. Whitmore took the seat opposite him, face unreadable, gaze calculating. He asked what Sterling wanted and whether he had come to surrender. Sterling did not answer. He placed the thick file on the table and slid it across. He told Whitmore to read. Whitmore opened it with suspicion, and as he turned each page, the color drained slowly from his face. His sharp eyes moved quickly over the evidence Griffin had gathered. Lists of former enemies willing to testify, records of illegal dealings that could send him to prison, and finally the testimony tying him to the assassination of Sterling's father 12 years earlier. Sterling stated calmly that it was proof of Whitmore's betrayal and murder of his father, that witnesses were ready to speak, that every dirty transaction from the past 2 decades was documented within those pages. Whitmore closed the file, struggling to maintain composure, though his hand trembled slightly. He asked what Sterling intended to do with it. Sterling replied that it depended on him. Whitmore narrowed his eyes and questioned whether he believed he could threaten him. Sterling shook his head and said he was offering a choice, something Whitmore had never granted his father. He rose and walked slowly around the table, voice steady, each word deliberate. The first choice was to continue the war. In that case, Sterling would send the file to every family, to law enforcement, to the press. Whitmore would be isolated, betrayed by those he once allied with, and ultimately destroyed not by Sterling but by the very world he had built. Then Sterling stopped directly in front of him and described the second choice. Whitmore would withdraw. He would call Priscilla back to the East Coast. All attacks would cease, and they would never cross paths again. Whitmore's jaw tightened, anger and disbelief flashing in his eyes. He asked whether Sterling was sparing him after he had killed his father. Sterling stood unmoving and said he was not sparing him and would never forgive what had been done, but he was choosing not to seek revenge. Whitmore demanded to know why. Sterling paused before answering, and when he did, his voice carried something deeper than cold resolve. He said he had 2 sons, 13 months old, children who knew nothing of blood and hatred and death in the dark. He wanted them to remain ignorant of that world for as long as possible. His father died because of that life. He would not let his sons grow up driven by vengeance for a grandfather they never met. He would not let them become him. He told Whitmore he could call it weakness if he wished, but Sterling called it strength, stronger than both of them combined, because it required courage to stop. Silence stretched across the abandoned restaurant. Whitmore looked from the file to Sterling and back again. At last he exhaled heavily, as though carrying the weight of 12 years of secrets. He admitted Sterling resembled his father more than he had thought. His father had once given him a chance as well. Sterling nodded and reminded him that he had chosen betrayal instead. Whitmore acknowledged it was the greatest mistake of his life, not because it led to this moment, but because he had not known a single night of true peace since the blood was first spilled. He stood, appearing older and more tired than when he entered. He agreed to withdraw. Priscilla would leave Chicago. The attacks would stop. It was finished. As Whitmore turned toward the door, Sterling spoke once more, warning that if he broke his word, there would be no second chance and no choice offered next time. Whitmore paused briefly, nodded without turning back, and disappeared into the darkness. Sterling remained alone in the abandoned restaurant, moonlight tracing pale lines across the dusty floor. He took out his phone and called the mansion. Iris answered with worry in her voice, asking if he was all right. He told her it was over and, for the first time in weeks, allowed himself a genuine smile. He said he was coming home. She asked again if he was hurt. He assured her he was fine, truly fine, as he looked toward the distant shimmer of Chicago's skyline. He told her to wait for him. 3 months after the meeting with Whitmore, life had changed completely. Priscilla left Chicago at her father's command. There were no more threatening messages, no counterfeit inspectors, no shadows lingering in the night. Whitmore kept his word. All attacks ceased, and the two families existed in silence, as if they had never known one another. Sterling began shifting most of his operations toward legitimate enterprises, a slow but steady transformation. He was still Sterling Ashford, still powerful and influential, yet the darkness was gradually giving way to light. Noah and Miles were nearly 18 months old, and talking more each day. Dad became their favorite word, repeated hundreds of times, until Sterling believed he would never tire of hearing it. Noah grew less reserved, sometimes even bursting into laughter when Sterling lifted him high into the air. Miles remained as spirited as ever, running through the mansion and forcing Griffin to chase after him like a reluctant bodyguard turned babysitter. Iris opened a small bakery of her own, not in Pilsen but on a quiet street near the mansion. Sterling provided the initial investment, and she insisted on repaying it, refusing to accept it as a gift because her pride would not allow that. Jolene came to work beside her, and together the two women built a warm place filled with the scent of fresh bread and hot coffee. The Gold Coast mansion was no longer a refuge, but a home, with toys scattered across polished floors, children's laughter echoing down the hallways, and the smell of home-cooked meals drifting from the kitchen each evening. One afternoon, Sterling asked Iris to dress nicely without offering an explanation. She looked at him with suspicion but complied, wearing the simple, pale blue dress he once told her suited her best. Jolene arrived to watch the boys, smiling mysteriously when Iris asked where they were going and simply telling her to go and that the children would be fine. Sterling drove her not to a fine restaurant or a grand hotel as she expected. Instead, he parked somewhere familiar, the small park in Pilsen where they had first reunited with the boys, where Noah first called him Dad. Iris looked around in the soft glow of the park lights. She asked why they were there. Sterling took her hand and led her to the old stone bench. He told her this was where he first became a father, where Noah said Dada, and he realized he wanted to be worthy of that word. This was where everything began. They sat together on the same bench where he once held both sons in his arms, unsure what to do next. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small box. Not a red velvet case from an expensive jeweler, but a worn wooden box, softened by time. Inside rested a simple gold ring, old and unadorned, without a large diamond or elaborate design. Iris looked at the ring, and then at him, her eyes widening. He explained it had belonged to his mother, the only thing she left before she died of illness when he was young. His father kept it until his death, and Sterling had held on to it for 12 years without knowing what to do with it. He rose and knelt before her, eyes steady in the gentle park light. He told her she had given him what he did not know he needed: family, purpose, a reason to become better. He admitted he was not perfect, that he carried a dark past he could not erase, that he had abandoned her when she needed him most, blocked every attempt she made to reach him, left her alone to give birth and nearly die. He said he would spend the rest of his life making amends if she allowed it. He lifted the box and asked whether she would give him the chance to stand beside her for the rest of their lives. Tears slipped down Iris's cheeks, yet she was smiling, brighter than he had ever seen. She said he already knew the answer. He told her he wanted to hear her say it. She answered yes, 1,000,000 times yes. Sterling slid his mother's ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had always belonged there. He rose and drew her up with him, and they kissed beneath the soft park lights, their first kiss since finding one another again. The kiss of two people who had walked through fire and met on the other side. When they parted, Iris laughed through her tears and said the boys would disrupt the wedding, that Miles would run everywhere, and Noah would refuse to wear proper clothes. Sterling laughed, light and free. He said he was looking forward to it. They sat back down on the bench, hands intertwined, gazing across the quiet park. Somewhere in the distance, Chicago remained loud and restless, a city alive with secrets and danger. Yet here, in this moment, there were only two people and the promise of a shared future. Sterling whispered his thanks and squeezed her hand. She tilted her head and asked what for. He answered that it was for not giving up on him, for granting him a second chance he did not deserve. 2 years after the evening of the proposal in Pilsen Park, the life of the Ashford family had changed completely. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Sterling pushed a double stroller along a gravel path in one of Chicago's great parks. Inside were the newest set of twins, 2 little girls named Fiona and Pearl, 6 months old, with hair soft as silk and amber eyes like their mother's. Ahead of him, Noah and Miles, now 4 years old, chased each other across the wide green lawn, their bright laughter carrying through the air. Iris sat on a picnic blanket beneath a large oak tree, watching her family with the most contented smile she had ever worn. Noah suddenly stopped and ran back toward Sterling, breathless from play, asking to be picked up. Miles followed immediately, unwilling to be left behind, insisting that he be lifted too. Sterling bent down and gathered them both into his arms, one child on each side, even though they weighed twice as much as they had the first time he held them in that small park years ago. He pretended to groan and asked whether they were trying to finish him off. Noah laughed and declared that his father was strong, the strongest of all. Just then, Fiona began to cry in the stroller, and as if by instinct, Pearl joined her sister in protest. Iris rose, brushing grass from her dress, and said it was feeding time, telling Sterling to set the boys down. He did, and told them to help their mother. They ran to Iris, but instead of helping, they tangled around her legs while she tried to retrieve bottles from the bag. Miles stumbled and spilled a box of cookies across the blanket, and Noah attempted to clean up by stuffing them into his mouth. Iris laughed helplessly while Sterling watched the chaos unfold. In that moment, he remembered the man he used to be. He once believed power was everything, that bank accounts and the fear of others defined a man's worth. He once believed family was a weakness, the place where enemies could strike to bring him down. He once believed love was a luxury a mafia boss could not afford, because loving someone meant giving them the power to destroy him. Now, watching Iris laugh as milk soaked into her blouse, watching Noah sit patiently beside the stroller, singing off-key to his sisters, watching Fiona and Pearl drift back to sleep in their mother's arms, he understood what had taken him nearly 40 years to learn. Family was not weakness. Family was the reason to be strong. When the babies were asleep again, and Noah and Miles were busy chasing butterflies, Iris came to sit beside Sterling on the blanket. She rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture now as natural as breathing. She asked quietly whether he ever regretted choosing this life, whether he regretted giving up power and empire for midnight feedings and diaper changes at 3 a.m. Sterling smiled, peaceful and unburdened. He said an empire could always be rebuilt, but a family could not. He looked around at his children playing, at Iris beside him, at the Chicago sky painted with pink and orange clouds. He told her this was his true empire. They sat in silence, watching Noah try to teach Miles how to catch butterflies, while Miles preferred simply to run and shout across the field. Fiona and Pearl slept in their stroller, unaware of the complicated world beyond the softness of their blanket and the shelter of their parents' love. Sterling whispered his thanks to Iris for giving him all of this. She squeezed his hand and said he had found it himself. She had only opened the door. Sterling Ashford, once the feared ruler of Chicago's underworld, looked at his small family in the late afternoon sun. The city still stood, still moved by its own rules, still shadowed by danger. But he no longer needed to dominate it. He had found something more valuable than any empire, something money could not buy and power could not seize. He had found the second chance he almost lost years ago at a crosswalk. The story of Sterling and Iris reminds us that it is never too late to change, never too late to mend the mistakes of the past. Sometimes the most precious things in life are not what we chase, but what we nearly lose while pursuing illusions. Family, love, connection, with those we hold dear. These are what truly matter, what give life its meaning. If you stood where Sterling once stood, holding all the power in the world but no one to share it with, would you have the courage to let it go and begin again? Do you believe in second chances? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would truly like to hear what rests in your heart. If this story touched you, press like and share it with those who believe in redemption. Do not forget to subscribe to Secrets Narrated and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next emotional journey. We sincerely thank you for spending your time with us today. May you and your loved ones have good health, joyful days, and lives filled with peace and love. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.